Today, I will be talking about our regional Q methodology data collection, specifically what we just did this last spring with Northeastern farmers, and go over some preliminary results. So again, these are just preliminary results. I will have to work more on the analysis in the future, so take everything with a grain of salt today. And we'll let you know once we feel more comfortable with actually sharing any of these results with the public. So briefly, I will give a super quick introduction, walk you through our Q methodology and framework analysis, which are the methods that we're using for this research. I will move then to preliminary results, talk about our next steps, and introduce some of the challenges that we've had with our work so far. So as Jen just mentioned, we're part of the social science team in PSA, and the goal of our group at UGA is to identify the variety of shared perspectives about the benefits and barriers to cover cropping within the context of conventional commodity ag, in order to develop tailored strategies to support adoption. So these are a lot of words, but basically we're trying to understand farmers' opinions on cover crops and help our extension team to use those results to come up with specific strategies for different kinds of viewpoints and groups of farmers trying to adopt cover crops. To do so, we have decided to use Q methodology. This methodology uses both quantitative and qualitative methods together to investigate people's subjectivity. So subjectivity is usually referred to as a person's beliefs, opinions, points of view on a given topic. In our case, the given topic is the use of cover crops in commodity ag. And so usually what happens is that if we have a group of people, in our case, farmers, and we apply Q methodology, then we can come up with different factors or viewpoints, again, on a topic, in our case, cover crops. And so how does this work? Well, the first step is develop an instrument. The instrument is a group of cards on a topic that farmers use and rank to express their opinions on the topic. And so once the instrument is developed, we usually do a first round of data collection, which we completed last year with our key informants. And this data collection is used to validate and review the instrument that then we use for a second round of data collection, which is what I'm doing now with farmers across the US. And then once all of the data are collected, we perform our analysis. And then finally, from the results of the analysis, again, because this is the goal of our group, we will try and come up with tailored outreach strategies. So today, I will only focus on these last three steps. So second, data collection, I'll give you an example of how we're doing the analysis, and then how those results can be used for our strategies. So the data collection with the farmers is happening in the three regions where PSA is present, so Northeast, South, and Midwest. We're not currently planning on working with any farmers in the West. Our goal is to interview between 24 and 27 farmers in each region from 3 states in each region. And we're targeting row croppers across the spectrum of adoption of cover crops. So both farmers that use and don't use cover crops. And we're trying to oversample for women and Black, Indigenous, and people of color, because usually those farmers are not as included in research on commodity ag. So we're trying to stress a little bit these two groups and try and get their points of view as well. So as I was mentioning initially, in spring 2022, I went and did my first round of data collection in the Northeast. Generally, the Northeast presents the highest level of cover crop adoption among commodity farmers in the US. And so the rationale to come up with 3 states in each region is that we're trying to have one state that presents a high level of adoption within the region, one state that has a mid-level of adoption, and then one that has a lower. And so for the Northeast, we decided to interview farmers from Maryland, so high cover crop adoption, high incentives, and the influence of Chesapeake Bay, Pennsylvania, which had a middle cover crop adoption, much lower incentives, usually given as a form of tax rebate. And then Pennsylvania is interesting because it also presents differences in agriculture and practices used between the east and the west part of the state. And then finally, we also worked with farmers in Vermont. Vermont presented a lower cover crop adoption among the three states. It has higher incentives than Pennsylvania, but still lower than Maryland. And farmers there also have to work with long winters. And so in all those three states, I reach out to PSA collaborators, extension agents outside of PSA, commodity groups, farmers associations, and I was also able to attend an event organized by the Pennsylvania No-Till Alliance. And so through all those connections, we were able to recruit 25 farmers, 9 from Vermont, 8 from Maryland, and 8 from Pennsylvania. And so in the span of 3 weeks, I traveled for more than 1,800 miles without considering our flights. And I came home with about 50 hours of interviews with those 25 farmers. And so all those little stars show you where I was in those 3 weeks talking to farmers. And it personally was really awesome to be able to travel so much and meet so many farmers in such a small amount of time. And so then we came home with the data. What data did we collect? So all the farmers completed the demographic survey. They then participated in a semi-structured interview. So we had an interview in which I had a number of questions that were already prepared that we knew we wanted to ask for sure to the farmers. And then based on where the conversation was going, I was able to add some questions and basically learn more than what we were necessarily expecting at the beginning. And then as part of this interview, I also asked the participants to do their card sort. And so this is that step from Q methodology that I was talking about. And so as you can see from the pictures, every farmer was given 51 cards. These cards had statements about cover cropping and agriculture in general. They were asked to think about their view on cover cropping and commodity ag, and then rank those cards in a table based on their agreement. And so with all this data, we are now moving into the analysis phase. And so for the demographic survey, we will generate some descriptive statistics. The semi-structured interviews will be analyzed using framework analysis. I will explain in just a minute what this is. And then the participant card sort is analyzed with a software that allows us to do Q-factor analysis. The software is called CADE. And basically this step, again, is quantitative and qualitative. And so the factor analysis basically is that step that allows us to go from all of the different card sorts to few detailed perspectives. So like shared viewpoints of what farmers are thinking on cover crops. And the reason why there's a little triangle here is because the framework analysis will also allow us to do what is called triangulation in qualitative research. So basically we will use the results from the interviews to help interpret our factors, but also to validate our interpretation, to make sure that what we're understanding from the factors actually corresponds to what the farmers meant. But it's important to know that the framework analysis will be especially useful because the interview allows us to learn certain things, certain aspects that wouldn't necessarily come out only from the Q sort. And so again, what is this framework analysis? It's basically an analytical approach that is used in qualitative science to interpret qualitative data. And so the first step is called familiarization. At this step, the researcher usually goes back to their notes and the transcripts of the interviews and starts jotting down the main issues, concepts, and themes that come up in the conversation. And so once it generates a list, this list basically creates the thematic framework. And so, for example, in our work, we know that one of the themes that will come up is the role of technology. And so once this list is compiled of all the important themes, the researcher goes back to their interview transcripts and starts indexing. So looking specifically for each theme. And so again, speaking about the example of technology, these are two super small extracts from two different interviews. We had farmer X say, yeah, technology interests me and how it's used. I think it can open up some doors to better data. Farmer Y said, I was thinking more along the lines of seed technology since I used to breed corn. And then the next step is called charting. So at this point, the researchers goes back to all of the index extracts of the transcripts and creates a table that basically summarize all the things that they're learning from the analysis. And so again, if we go back to the example of technology, one thing that we're learning already is that for some farmers, like farmer X, technology refers more to things like data collection on the farm. While for other farmers like farmer Y, technologies might be more linked to biological improvements. And so then the last step, which is called mapping and interpretation, is the step when the researcher from the charting tries to generalize meaning, tries to extract meaning from all these single examples and interpret what is coming out. And this can be helpful in our case, for example, to inform those potential strategies. And so again, looking at technology, something that we could think when we develop our strategies is that there are different conceptualizations of technologies. Technologies can be thought as biophysical, informatic, mechanical. And so these different conceptualizations could affect how growers think about management and also how they think about practices like cover crop. And so all of this will help us understand and make sense of our factors that are basically the results of the participant card sorts. And so once we run the factor analysis, what we get out of our software is a table that looks like this. This is called a composite sort. So basically, the software gives us an average table of all of the sorts following in one factor. So in plain words, this is basically what we would get if all the farmers from the same factor would sit together around the table and complete our card ranking together, discussing, deciding, making compromises of where they want the cards to be, and then generating just one table instead of one table for each one of them. As I said initially, we have 51 cards, so there's a lot of topics that come up. And so how do we even start interpreting these, all of these statements? Well, there is kind of a roadmap. There is a roadmap that we can follow. And so the first step is to look at distinguishing statements. And so as you can see, some of the statements have these little asterisks, these little stars. That means that those statements are statistically significant for the people in this factor. So compared to the other factors, they are ranked in a place that is statistically significant. And then also the arrow signals that the statement not only is statistically significant, but is also ranked higher if the arrow is pointing right, or lower if the arrow is pointing left, than for all the other factors. So this is the first important information that we get. And then we usually look at all of the statements that are ranked lower in this factor compared to other factors, independently on whether they're statistically significant or not. And then we looked at all the statements that are ranked higher. And then we start looking more at the detail of the content of the statement. And so, for example, we can look for statements that talk about financial aspects, statements that talk about the benefits of cover cropping, and statements that talk about the negative effects and barriers to cover cropping, and keep doing so until basically we touch on all the themes that are talked about in the different cards. And so from this composite sort, we can finally come up with those shared perspectives that are what we're looking for. And so what I learned from this preliminary analysis that I conducted is that of the 4 factors that came out of our research, there were some common aspects that all the factors, all the farmers shared. And so all the farmers expressed a sense of stewardship, usually ranking cards like card 20 and 22 very highly. So like strongly agree, 10, 8, 9. They also usually stress the importance of soil health for them, their belief in the benefits of cover crops. They also talked about how farmers can make cover crops work for them, ranking cards like card 48 and card 51 very low. And then generally they seemed pleased with the efforts from local colleges and universities in sharing information and promoting cover crops. So these were the common aspects, but these farmers were not all the same.
Yeah, and that's what it looks like. It's
and so we also had some more specific differences. And so, for example, our perspective A was generally keeping a positive attitude. The farmers in this factor tended to focus on the benefits of cover crops, disagreeing with most of the barriers and negative effects linked to them. They would like to see more institutional support through incentives, policies, and programs, but generally the economic bottom line is not their primary concern. They showed that community support is very important to them, and even though they feel like that sometimes agriculture might be misportrayed by the media, they think that farmers still have freedom in their work and in the tools they want to use. They are pleased with the work of local universities and colleges, but would like to see more research on cover crops and technological advancements. And all the farmers in this factor were from Maryland and Pennsylvania. Our perspective B was all about the economic bottom line. And so what we saw is that differently than the previous factor, for farmers in this group, the economic bottom line was maybe the main aspect. They looked positively at the benefits of cover crops, but generally ranked those a little lower compared to farmers and other factors. And even though they were interested in stewardship, that did not seem to be their primary motivation to use cover crops. They tend to give great importance on information from research, and they tend to believe that hard facts, numbers are the best way to sell cover crops among new farmers who are not adopting the practice yet. They also were all from Vermont and talked about local limitations. So again, this is an example of how having the interview is really important. So talking about local limitation, I asked one of the farmers, what do you think is the hardest, the main challenge in using cover crops in Vermont? And their response was just the shorter growing season. You basically have like a week, maybe 2 weeks to get a cover crop established before there's a frost. So it really limits the variety of cover crops you can use. And so you can see, because of the interview, we're not only learning that there's local limitations, but we're learning about what those limitations are. And this can be really important when we think about our strategies. Moving on, perspective C, farmers in this group talked about the need for more information and guidance. They tended to rank barriers and negative effects closer to the middle, so a little higher than farmers in other groups. And so they were maybe a little more skeptical than other farmers about cover crops. They talked about the need for more information on cover crops. They were Still pleased with the efforts from universities in talking about cover crops, but maybe slightly less pleased than other factors. They talked about how cover crops can help farmers be more self-sufficient, and even though they would like to see more incentives, they talked about their belief in consumer support. So they believe that consumers could pay more for commodities produced with practices like cover crops. The farmers in this group were from all 3 states. And what was interesting to notice is that 2 out of the 3 farmers in this factor were part-time farmers, where farming was their secondary occupation rather than their first one. And then lastly, we had perspective D, where farmer mentioned the need for more than just economic support. So farmers in this group stressed attributing a strong value to community and local connections. They talked about how farmers in their area usually share experiences and talk to each other. They also mentioned feeling that farmers are heavily regulating and that they're losing the tools available to them. They were skeptical of the efficacy of incentives, and mentioned how they feel that many farmers who are receiving incentives are doing it more for the economic benefits rather than having an actual belief in the benefits of cover crops. They would like to see more research on cover crops, and they would also like to see industry being more involved. They talked about, for example, farmers having limitations in available seed for cover crops from seed companies. And lastly, they talked about seeing leased land as a barrier to cover crops. And again, all the farmers in this group were from Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Vermont. And so now that we know what these perspectives are, we can try and look at the next steps. And so, for example, our team will be hiring a postdoc who will be collaborating with the extension team to try and come up with those tailored strategies. So from the factors and what we're learning about those perspectives, we will be able to create those tailored strategies. And so, for example, going back to our perspective B, the ones who are all about the economic bottom line, well, we know that as for other farmers, they still think that farmers are stewards. And so one important thing to keep in mind is that we should keep affirming the farmer's identity as stewards. They talked about local limitations. And so something that would be important for these farmers would be to generate location-specific recommendations that they could look at to feel more comfortable in using cover crops. And finally, they were really concerned and interested in the economic bottom line. And so it would be important to keep strengthening and expanding the economic support and opportunities for farmers who are using cover crops, as well as showing financial returns that could come out of cover crop adoption. So this is what happened with the data collection in the Northeast. As I said, I will do this again. And so my next step is to continue the data collection. I will go in the South between this summer and fall, and then next spring I will be in the Midwest. And then once I'll have all of the data, I'll go back to my analysis. And so again, I will conduct the factor analysis, try to interpret all of the different perspectives, do my framework analysis, and use the 2 tools together to come up with as many information as we can have. And I will do the analysis first on a regional basis. So as I did now for farmers in the Northeast, I will look at farmers in the South by themselves and then farmers in the Midwest by themselves. But then I will also conduct a comparative analysis. So I will analyze all of the farmers together to see if there are any shared perspectives on a national level that might be independent of regional aspects and viewpoints. So challenges, because I think we need to be upfront on this too. As I said, the data collection happened in 3 weeks. 3 weeks for qualitative research is a limited time. I wish I had more time to spend with the farmers. I wish I had more time to be on the farm with them, in their community, attend more of their events they go to, and learn more from them. I was very lucky to have farmers willing to spend from 1.5 to 3 hours talking to me. But it would have been great to have a chance to be in their community more and learn more. Similarly, I think if I had a chance to be more in the community, maybe it would have been easier to reach out to more farmers, and possibly to find a way to talk to non-adopters, because even though everything we've learned is very, very important and very informative, all of the participants from the Northeast were cover crop adopters. And so we know that we are missing out a little bit on our goal, which is to talk to farmers in the entire spectrum of adoption. And then finally, we were able to talk to only 2 women and 1 BIPOC farmer. So even though that's better than nothing, we would like to have a chance to include more and more farmers from those groups. So we are looking for suggestions, both of farmers that you think we should reach out to, and also strategies or other groups that can help us reach out to more farmers. With this, I have completed my presentation for today. I want to thank all of our participants and collaborators, because without them, we would not be able to do any of this. And I really appreciate all their time and work that they did to help me and make this research successful.